Hi, this is Supriyo. In this video, we are going to talk about priority sector lending. So what are these PSL norms that we keep talking about? And it's very important today because very recently in September, RBI has changed a lot about the priority sector lending norms and we should know each and every single thing. So let's begin. So the first thing that we have to start with is the basic concept of the priority sector lending. So why did this thing actually come? So priority sector lending. This means that we are lending towards some priority sectors. Now, why did the government have to classify some sectors as priority sectors? This is because earlier, just think about the 60s, the 50s, the 60s, the 70s. At that point of time, all these big banks that you can see right now, they were in private control, and also all the boards of those banks had the big industrialists. So what used to happen was that the bank was only lending to those big industry houses and they were not lending to the common man. This was a major problem, and that is why the National Credit Council in 1968 first time they used this word, the PSL, the priority sector lending. So that was the first mention of the priority sector, and then in 1972 RBI said that we are going to have some norms towards it. So in the 70s and 80s it actually started, and what we actually did through this is that we allowed the credit to reach all the sections of the society, so every section of the society can actually develop. That was the major goal of the government, that the country has to develop holistically and all these loans should not be concentrated in the hands of just a few people. So that was the basic concept of the priority sector. And why do we need the priority sector lending? So basically, just as I explained to you, we were not having all the financial inclusion and the loans were not reaching the people on the ground, and that was the reason for which we needed to have this priority sector lending norms. Now the first thing that we have to understand is that which are the priority sectors. So right now RBI has classified these sectors as the priority sectors. So priority sectors means these sectors which are very important for the development of the Indian economy. These sectors are usually neglected by the banks. So RBI states that you have to carefully give loans to these sectors of the economy. So the priority sector, they include these categories. So we have agriculture, we have MSME, we have export credit, education, housing, social infrastructure, renewable energy, and also there is a category called others. Now in others there are lot of different things. There are self-help groups, there are female borrowers, there is SC, ST borrowers, and all the other types of borrowers that are included in this section. And also startups, they have now been introduced in August 2020. If any bank gives loans to startups, then also it will be considered under the priority sector. So this is a very important new development, and we are going to talk about the loan limits and everything. Don't worry, I'll be covering each and everything. And now we have to understand the thing called the ANBC. So this means the adjusted net bank credit. So this is a very important thing which is very useful to learn before you understand the PSL. So ANBC, it comes from NBC, or net bank credit. So net bank credit, NBC, what is this? This is basically all the loans that the bank is actually giving. So all the different kinds of loans that the bank has given out minus the bills that have been rediscounted by the banks. So what is this rediscounting? This is basically a concept of the discounting. So discounting means the bank is giving loans to some companies, and rediscounting means the bank is again discounting those bills to get some additional credit. So that is why we are minusing this thing and we come to net bank credit. So from NBC, how do we get to ANBC? ANBC is nothing but the summation of net bank credit. With that, you are summing the investments in the non-SLR bonds held in the HTM category, or the held to maturity category, plus other investments eligible to be treated as priority sector. So summing all of these things, it gives you the ANBC. So this will be important in the next thing that we are going to see. So just remember that. And also remember that there were two important committees, the recommendations of which were actually just accumulated together by the RBI, and they have combined all of these recommendations to publish their new PSL norms. So those committees, they were the MSME committee led by UK Sinha, very very important, and also the internal working group to review agricultural credit by MK Jain. So these two committees are very important to remember. And the next thing is that you must remember which are the different types of banks for which these PSL norms are actually applicable. So they are the SCBs, the scheduled commercial banks, the regional rural banks, the small finance banks, the local area banks, and the urban cooperative banks, except the salary earners banks. So this is a separate kind of UCB, so we do not need to include that. Except for that, most of the banks, they need to follow this PSL norms. So this is very very important. Now let us move towards the PSL targets. So what are the targets that we must follow? This is very very important. So I have created a small picture by which you can actually understand the overall thing. So this is the important picture that you must remember, very very important. So the overall PSL target, it is 40%, and this 40%, it is of what actually? It is of ANBC, or credit equivalent amount of off balance sheet exposure, whichever is greater. This is very important. ANBC, or the credit equivalent amount of off balance sheet exposure, whichever is greater, you have to actually calculate 40% of that value. Remember this very very well, because some questions can be framed from this. And the sub targets, so under this overall 40%, we have some sub targets. So according to different types of sectors, we have to have certain percentages. So under this 40%, we have agriculture 18%, micro enterprises 7.5%, and weaker sections we used to have 10%, but now we do not have that anymore. We have 12%, and this will be in a phased manner. I'll just be showing you now. So these are the three important things that you need to remember. And also remember that the overall PSL target for RRBs and the small finance banks, it is 75%. So their PSL quota, it is much more than the other banks. Remember that. And the overall target for the local area banks, it is 40%. This is the same as the other banks. And we also have a sub quota for agriculture. So this 18% that you can see over here, out of this 18%, we have to have a sub quota of small and marginal farmer, which was earlier 8%, but now it is not that. Now it is 10%. This is also in another phased manner. We are going to see that. So 10% of that 18% has to be given to small and marginal farmer. Why this was actually created? Because the RBI felt that big farmers were actually getting a lot of loans, but the small farmers were not getting. So the marginal farmer, this is a farmer which has the land area up to 1 hectare. So a farmer which has an area of up to 2.5 acre, and a small farmer owns greater than 1 up to 2 hectares. So up to 5 acres are owned by a small farmer. So both of these different types are very important, and these things are often asked in the examinations. So remember these things very very well and just note them down for further revision. And I'll just show you what the RBI actually showed us. So 4 categories they have actually created: domestic commercial banks and foreign banks with 20 branches and above. This is the first category. Then you have foreign banks with less than 20 branches. Then you have regional rural banks and the small finance banks. So they have actually prepared guidelines for each of these categories. Now for the normal, this type of bank, the domestic commercial banks, it will be 40% of ANBC or CEOBE, whichever is higher, what we already talked about. And for the agriculture, we have 18% sub target of agriculture, out of which 10% is prescribed for small and marginal farmers. This is also very important, and I'll just show you the phased manner by which we are going to get to that. And the micro enterprises 7.5%, weaker sections 12%. So these are the important things that you need to remember. Now if a foreign bank has less than 20 branches in India, then they have 40%, the same level followed by the other banks. But here there is a big difference. Here up to 30% can be in the form of lending to exports and not less than 8% to any other priority sector. So this is actually created because these small banks, they do not have the number of branches required to go to those rural places and give those loans. So for them a leeway has been given, and they do not have any sub target. So there is no sub target over here, no sub target over here, and no sub target over here. For the RRBs, it is 75%, as we already talked about. And here also another thing you need to remember, remember that the lending to medium, social infrastructure and the renewable energy shall be reckoned only up to 15% of ANBC. And again, the agriculture target, it is same 18%, micro enterprises again 7.5%. But here notice something, for the weaker sections you have 15% over here. So here there is a slight difference. And for the small finance banks, again 75%, here also 18%, 7.5%, and again 12% of ANBC over here. So these are the small differences that you need to remember for the different categorizations of the banks. And now let us just see about the phased implementation. So coming to the phased implementation, remember that the targets for lending to the small and marginal farmers and the weaker sections, these two, they have been increased, right? So they will be revised upwards from financial year 2021 to 22. So here there is another important difference that we need to remember for the primary urban cooperative banks. So for the UCBs, they have actually made some new changes. Earlier, the UCBs had to follow the 40% target which was there, but now it has to be raised to 75%. And how will this be raised? Now it is 40%. By March 31st, 2024, it will be 75%. So as you can see, there will be some slight phased implementation and they will be raising it each and every year. So for the micro enterprises, the 7.5% will remain. For the weaker sections, 12% will remain for the UCB. So that remains unchanged. And the revised targets for the small and marginal farmers and the weaker sections, these were also actually increased. So there is no need to do it immediately, but you can do it by financial year 2023 to 24. You can raise it to 10%, 12%. Also remember that for the urban cooperative banks, the small and marginal farmer target, the sub target, is not applicable. And also remember that the weaker sections target for RRBs is going to be 15%. So they are not going to change that. So this is all about the different targets that you need to remember for our different categories of banks. And then you have to understand what are the weaker sections. So this is also something that the RBI talks about quite a lot. So what are those weaker sections actually? So these are the various categories of weaker sections. So remember these things, just take a look. Remember the important ones are the small and marginal farmers. Then you have the SHGs, the self-help groups. Then you have the women beneficiaries up to 1 lakh. So up to 1 lakh, if the bank is giving loan to any female borrower, then that also comes under weaker section. And the persons with disabilities, then different things you have, the NULM, the NRLM, and all the other things, you can just take a read. This is not that much important, but just to make yourself informed, you can read it. Now coming to the next section, so what are the different loan limits by which we can actually determine whether the loan is a PSL loan or not? So this is also very important to remember. So any kind of educational loan up to 10 lakh rupees, it is considered under the PSL quota. Similarly, the individual female borrower that I was just talking about, up to 1 lakh loans are considered. Micro and small enterprises, it will be 5 crore. Medium enterprises, it is 10 crore. The social infrastructure, the school, the sanitation, the water, etc., this will be 5 crore. And this was actually recently told by RBI. So this is very important, just remember that. And the housing loan, this is also very important. This was actually changed in 2019 by the RBI. It was earlier a little bit lesser. So in the metro cities, this will be 35 lakh, up to 35 lakh. If you are buying any house in a metro city, it will be under PSL quota. But remember, the house has to cost a maximum of 45 lakh rupees. Similarly, housing loan in other centers, it will be 25 lakh. The cost of the house has to be maximum 30 lakh. So these two important things, they are also something that have been asked in recent examinations. In the RBI grade B also, these things have been asked. And the renewable energy, so the wind, hydel, solar, biomass, they have 30 crores. So this was actually 15 crores earlier, but now they have increased it. So this is also a new thing, remember it. And the renewable energy households, so if you are installing some renewable energy sources at your home, you can get maximum of 10 lakh. And then the startups and the health infra, these are the two new categories. So for startups, it is 50 crore rupees. So this is very, very important. This will be a great boost to all startups. And for the health infrastructure, it will be 10 crore rupees. This is also something that you need to remember. So remember all of these loan limits because it will be very helpful for your examinations. And now coming to the differential districts weightage. So this is also something that the RBI has very recently told us. So this is actually for empowering each and every district. So RBI in their analysis, they have actually found that some districts, they are actually lagging behind. So they have devised a weightage system from financial year 2022 based on PSL credit flow. This means that for the low credit flow, which is defined as per capita PSL lesser than rupees 6,000, the weight will be 125%. So this means that if you are giving any kind of priority sector loan to that district, say you are giving 100 rupees, RBI will consider it as 125 rupees. So that is what it means. And for the high credit flow districts, so the per capita PSL has to be greater than 25,000 rupees. It will be 90% weight. And RBI says that 205 districts have high PSL credit flow while 184 districts have low. So this is also something that is very recently introduced, and you might have some questions regarding this in the upcoming exams. And now coming to what happens when the banks are missing their PSL targets. So this also depends on the type of bank. So if it is any Indian bank, any Indian commercial bank, or any kind of foreign bank which has at least 20 branches or more, then you have to actually deposit that shortfall to the RIDF, which is the Rural Infrastructure Development Fund. So if for example 100 rupees you have given as loan and 40 rupees you had to actually give as PSL, so you were not able to do, you maybe only did 35 rupees, then that 5 rupees you have to actually deposit in that RIDF. So this RIDF, it is managed by the NABARD, and they will be giving some states loans for their infrastructure purposes, for their rural infrastructure purposes. So that is all about the RIDF. And if you are a foreign bank with lesser than 20 branches, then you have to deposit the same amount in the SEDF, which is the Small Enterprises Development Fund. Now SEDF, it is actually managed by the SIDB, and they have also the similar kind of thing. So they will be giving the loans to the state finance corporations, and they will be helping the small enterprises to develop. And remember that all these amounts that you are actually giving to the RIDF and the SEDF, if you are getting some interest on it, then that interest will actually be paid back to the banks. However, what happens in these big infra projects, the money is actually stuck for 20 years, 30 years. So that is the main problem, which is why giving money to the RIDF or the SEDF is actually not useful for any bank. So what happens, they have actually devised something else which will help these kinds of banks. So that is called the PSLC, or the Priority Sector Lending Certificate. So to understand this, think that you are a private bank. Say you are Axis Bank. You do not have so much rural branches and you were not able to meet the 40% quota. So for example, you have just met 38%, and now there is the State Bank of India. Now State Bank of India has such a big rural network, right? So if the SBI has such a huge network, they are giving more rural loans. So for example, SBI has actually done 42%. So what you can do, SBI can actually pay you that 2% as priority sector lending certificate. So if you are taking that, then you do not need to have any kind of deposits to the RIDF or the SEDF. Your PSL quota will be considered as fulfilled. So that is the utility of the priority sector lending certificates. And we have different kinds of certificates. So let's see what these are. So there are 4 types of PSLC: PSLC agriculture, PSLC small farmer or marginal farmer, and PSLC micro enterprises, and PSLC general. So these PSLC, they are not transferring the credit risk. This is very important to understand. So the loan, whatever has been given by State Bank of India, the payments of that loan are going to go back to the State Bank of India. So there is no transfer of risk in that regard. However, by buying this PSLC, Axis Bank is going to fulfill its quota, and the selling bank, in this case the SBI, are going to receive a fee. So you are going to earn a fee by selling this PSLC to some other bank. And in which platform is this selling and buying taking place? It is done via the RBI's eKuber platform. So that's all about the priority sector lending. So these are the very important things that you need to remember, since RBI has made so many changes. So make sure that you have noted down everything. I hope that you learned something from this session and that it was beneficial to you. If you enjoyed this session, please click on the subscribe button and do not forget to click the bell icon so that you, my friend, do not miss any future update. I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye.